What we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is a relatively new phenomenon in the insurance industry called capitation. Capitation is a method of exchange between health insurance entities and healthcare providers. Insurers give a provider a large group of patients, let's say 100,000, and the insurer and the provider agree upon a price at which to treat these patients, let's say 10 million. If the provider is able to treat all 100,000 patients for less than 10 million, then the provider gets to keep that difference. If the provider spends more than 10 million, the provider has to cover the difference. This system has the upshot of reducing healthcare costs, but it also has the consequence of misaligning the incentives of major healthcare players. Is capitation institutionally correct? Capitation is a systemic occurrence that has become entrenched in the healthcare industry. It is strategic in that its purpose is to lower the cost of healthcare for insurance companies, and it undermines the institution's effectiveness by weakening its ability to achieve its purpose. The purpose of healthcare systems is to maximize the country's health while balancing effectiveness with efficiency. The incentives of insurers, provider groups, and doctors should be aligned in a way to incentivize the most efficiently effective patient care possible. Does capitation do this? Issue 1. Still incentive for unnecessary care. There are loopholes in healthcare. One is called claims truncation. Some contracts have a clause that states if any one patient costs more than $150,000 over 1 year, then that patient is excluded from the capitation agreement, and the insurer pays for this patient separately. Some other contracts require the providers purchase third-party insurance against having a patient cost more than $150K. Doctors no longer have an incentive to not order the extra tests and frequently go crazy spending big on these patients. Why wouldn't they? An extra test leads to straight cash. But these extra tests are not without harm. They can decrease patients' trust in the system. In most insurance contracts, patients pay for annual healthcare costs up to a certain amount, called a deductible, and also pay a copay, a percentage of most treatments up to a certain amount. People still have incentives to keep costs down. So if a patient feels that doctors are prescribing unnecessary treatments, how can they trust their doctors? How can they know if the extra prescription drug is beneficial or the extra test is necessary? This undermines patients' trust in the process, which detracts from both doctors' goals of supplying good care and patients' goal of receiving good care. And, more importantly, it undermines the whole goal of capitation: cheaper, more efficient care. Issue 2. Doctors and provider groups' incentives are misaligned. Another issue is with how incentives are passed from provider groups to doctors. In some cases, insurance companies negotiate with physician groups, a group of self-employed doctors who profit share. These physicians are awarded a percentage of savings under the capitation threshold. The system works. But in most cases, doctors are employed by hospital systems. Here, how the spend little incentive is passed down to the doctors up to the discretion of the group. These doctors have some incentive to keep costs down. But let's say a patient is allotted $100 for treatment. If the doctor spends $50, that's great. But if the doctor spends $110, there's little incentive for the doctor to keep costs down once the threshold is breached. Actually, the extra tests may net the doctor money while the provider loses. The provider may notice this and talk to individual doctors, but this is unlikely because of the issue we began with. The extra tests can often be justified. Better to be safe than sorry, right? We've digressed. Back to your initial reactions. Some of you may have thought you're going to incentivize doctors to spend as little as possible on me. Issue 3. Patients take the back seat. Doctors themselves have an incentive to provide suboptimal care during treatment, so long as it will not end up in a patient return visit. This is true even if the treatment may not lead to the best outcome. The system rewards doctors not for quality of care, but for keeping costs down without patients returning to the hospital. A healthcare system based on low costs promotes underutilization of healthcare, potentially at the risk of patient outcome. Put another way, spending less money on someone necessarily means providing less care, which may mean worse care. Solutions are tough because of information asymmetry. Doctors know individual situations better than anyone and are the only ones qualified to prescribe treatment, so regulating doctors is difficult. An ideal solution would both incentivize great quality care while staying efficient. We propose a two-pronged approach that is both efficient and maintains a high quality of care. The issue with the traditional fee-for-service system, where doctors are paid per test or procedures, that doctors oversubscribe care, can return to the system without overconsumption. In our solution, patients opt into deductible plans as before, but what if we amp up traditional $400 deductibles to $2,000? And to ensure that patients can pay this, they must make a non-taxable savings account only available for use on health-related things. And if a patient doesn't spend all the money in their account in 1 year, the money rolls over to the next. These patients will incentive not to overconsume healthcare and will also discourage unnecessary procedures. If the patient has a hernia that doesn't bother him, there's little reason to fix it. In the past, doctors have heavily encouraged patients to get such unnecessary procedures. This leads to the second prong of our approach. For our solution, where patients must feel comfortable telling doctors they don't want a procedure or test, the government needs to invest in a simple online sickness and treatment database that is informative and basic. Let's return to our hernia patient whose doctor tells him he needs treatment. They won't operate directly because it requires preparation and scheduling. When the patient returns home after the consultation, he can get on his computer and research hernias on the website to find that surgery isn't necessary when there's no discomfort and may actually lead to worse outcomes. This way, patients will be empowered to enter discussions with physicians more informed to ensure they're receiving the right amount of care. These two prongs ensure that there's an incentive not to overconsume medicine while giving patients resources to know when to and when not to follow through the procedure. It also ensures that patients aren't visiting doctors too often. The solution has some flaws. We're concerned that high deductibles and savings accounts will discourage consumption of healthcare to the point where patients are not receiving enough care. We're also concerned that while most patients would take the initiative and use the site, some may continue to enter discussions with doctors uninformed, allowing doctors to take advantage of the information asymmetry. However, we hope by making the website both easy to use and simple to understand, along with relying on doctors to clearly express when procedures are absolutely necessary to ensure that patients do not underutilize care, a high deductible plus mandatory healthcare savings account will lead to better outcomes and efficiency than capitation ever could.
Created using Powtoon.